some type of coordinate the invitation for this committee.
Sounds good. I put next up on the agenda, review the current situation. Basically talk about what's going on right now as we speak. I'll open the floor to that. I don't have any huge changes. I know, that's really where we're kind of status quo right now as far as what we're seeing. I think we're waiting to see, from the new Chapel side of things, what happens with the, when Floyd moves forward, if they have resources to put in our county and that effect and things. I know, Tri-Township has run a few times as well and everything, so, but are there anything that, from the board side of things, that you want to say about the current situation? Changing since last time?
Any updates? I mean, you don't have any updates from last month?
I did make a couple, made one run with EMS, crew was really professional. They kind of labeled me as the boogeyman already, so I don't want anybody to think that. I just wanted to stop in and check and see how they're doing. I know that there's a lot of scrutiny going on, but it's definitely not the crews that are at fault or any of that, so I want to make sure that we still need them. We're going to need to make sure they're supported.
Well, and I think that's the important thing is what are care issues that are happening now versus, 5 years ago, and, what's as a result of being under the microscope and what are, real differences and things like that. And, so I think it's important to make sure that we're, as fair as balanced as possible. I did, you guys get the response times from April. Obviously I'll have May's at the end of the month, but, and one thing I will say, and I'll talk about this when we look at the public safety plan, and overall, just concrete, this is the response time for the county, probably isn't the most accurate way to determine what's going on. About 50% of our runs come from the city of Jeff, so, you could say, okay, I'll make our response time 1 minute in Jeff and then, 30 minutes in the rest of the county or things like that. So I think the breakdown of, how many runs are going out in the different municipalities and the response time is really helpful. So thanks to 911 for getting us that. So, but overall, I think there's been some moves, some improvements there. The Monroe Township down to 15 minutes. I think we were pretty consistently 19-20, for a few months and things like that. So that's just
Question: when did your ambulance go in service in Henderville?
March 23rd.
Okay.
However,
I was gonna say, is that cool?
we went in service the end of March. However, one of the two people that was slated to start in that position never showed up.
Sure.
So there was probably 3 weeks there where it was staffed half the time.
So mid-April, probably.
Mid-April, we've got both of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wondered if this data reflected any of that.
Not truly yet.
Not truly.
Yeah.
Because even when Ashley started, she worked a week and she took a
Well,
vacation.
she worked 1 day and then took 2 weeks vacation.
Yeah, so.
You figure that out.
Yeah.
It was part of the bonus package, evidently, she got to come to work.
I think the improved time there from over March, that's moving in the right direction, but you'll see that reflected a lot better in May. I'm sure.
Good, sounds good. The next thing I have on there is Floyd County Review, and I'm not looking to, get into their business, but I think, you've got a, adjacent county with a similar situation, somewhat playing out right in front of us. So I think we'd be silly not to watch what's happening over there and, see how that applies or doesn't apply to us and things like that. The one thing I will say that, that is catching my attention is, they're really down to the wire. I think they're about a week before the contract runs out, and I think they're kind of scrambling. And we have, 18, 20 months to look at everything. So, that's my only thing is let's just keep this ball rolling and things like that, so it doesn't come down to the very end to where it's a mad scramble and people are trying to, flex paperwork up and craziness at the last minute. So, that was my takeaway from this. I do think we need to be realistic and look at what, what their subsidy asks and things like that have been over there, because that does, if you extrapolate it to Clark County, we can probably get an idea of what asks are gonna look like for us too. And so I think those are the important things to watch, and when we see that situation unfold over there. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that as well.
I mean, I think the one thing that I want to say concerns me or is something, the relocation of assets from Floyd County at Station 1 is that going to impact, you know, like it's office space, like kind of like the headquarters, is there a move that's occurring that is going to make sure that there's no, you know, I guess, loss of service during that transition period from the fire department there to the location?
Yeah, we're working through those details, today and tomorrow on the physical move, that wasn't necessarily anticipated for right away, but, it shouldn't provide any problems of service, because nobody that's operating in a clinical capacity is gonna be involved with that, so.
That's the only thing, as I watched it, kind of, I like one off the.
Where do you anticipate moving to? Back to the Utica station or?
We'll be spread apart, spread out a little
Spread out.
bit for a minute, but,
Yeah.
we do have a new Clarksville location. We meet with the town of Clarksville tomorrow, just to wrap that up. The new Clarksville location will go live June 1st. We also have another, location in Sellersburg that is kind of in the back of our mind. If something like this were to happen, we anticipate that should be able to be, operational June 1st also, so.
Well, I'd see, and I mentioned this before, you know, as we're looking at what we want to do as a county, you know, watching them over there, that we do need to make sure as we're spitballing ideas and things that we do take into account the fiscal component of things. Because, you know, I think it's easy for us to say, this is what we want to do, this is clear, but it also does need to have coinciding with it, you know, this is how we would propose to pay for any solutions or anything
Well,
like that.
I think you're talking about extrapolating money, you know, like you said, 3 ambulances, 1.5, 1 to 1.5. We're looking probably 6 to 8 for Clark County. At that current rate, you're probably looking $4 million a year. For the next 3-year contract, what happens to the cost after that 3 years? So now we're up to 5-6 million. So you're paying north of $10 million for a 3-year contract. You know, you can build one for cheaper and make it self-sufficient for cheaper. So, you know, I'm not opposed to looking at all options, but I think I agree. I think we need to get some business brains involved that look at the financials, to look at the long-term cost to the taxpayers. Strictly just looking at it from a fiscal standpoint. And that way we've got option A, we've got option B. You can look at it, you can say, hey, this is what it's gonna cost us.
Well, I think that's one thing I've been a little remiss. I mean, we talk, you know, philosophy and everything, and loop in the commissioner sometimes on these philosophical talks, but, you know, don't always loop in the council like I should, because again, they are the fiscal side of that, and so I probably, you know, need to loop them in and have some discussions too, just to see what, you know, what kind of options are available there. You know, because even, no matter what we look at, it's gonna be a pretty salty investment, whether it's a, you know, subsidy or a municipal service or what, it's gonna be a lot of money.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, 6 ambulances is not enough. And that's just, I mean, you can look at the data here. I mean, especially this hour by hour breakdown. You're talking, you know, sometimes there's 14 or 15 runs in an hour. You know, that's, I don't know how anybody covers
There's
those
not a
6
perfect
ambulances.
model.
Yeah.
No.
You can have 20 ambulances, eventually you're gonna run out. We all know that.
Yeah.
You know, what is a good par level for ambulances for the county? I think that's where you start getting, you know, do we need to have some sort of study done looking at placement of resources? How would we fund it? And what would it look like long term? What would it look like short term, mid-range, long term? You have to set all 3 of those goals.
It is something I always struggle with, because I would love to do a study and see that, but then you see the price tag on some of those studies, it's pretty salty too. Like, gosh, you know, do we have the minds here to do it? But then you also get what you pay for sometimes. I'm not sure if we put our heads together that we have the same level of quality, but man, I see the price tag on some of those studies. It's like several $100,000 that we could be putting towards other things too. I struggle with it. You know?
Yeah, I think that some of the data there, but the data is all there. It's just how, you know, how we compile that to be used to benefit, you know, the county.
Well, I also think, you know, we have to factor in that, are we one of the top 5 or 6 growing counties in the state right now? I mean, I know we're one of the few that has a strong growth rate.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, we're flattening out 3 years. I mean, look out here. I mean, what's out here gonna look like 3 years from now? Probably quite a bit different.
Look at your property values alone. I mean,
Yeah.
everything's going up.
Yeah, so I do think, you know, we need to, as we do this, not just look at the current situation, but try to project out what this county's gonna look like in, you know, 3, 5, 10 years too, you know, because it's probably gonna be vastly
The
different.
other thing is the population's aging, so your need for, your calls for service are gonna increase. We did 21,000 last year, we could do 23,000 this year, 5,000 next year, you know, who knows what that projection is.
Yep, I agree.
Was it actually reported, like in Floyd County, that they've actually paid for like 2 to 3 studies over the last 5 or so many years?
I know
They've had
one,
studies
but,
done,
yeah.
They did a fit.
just one? Cause I thought it, somewhere it said that they've done at least 1 or 2 over a period of time, and they just never really did use that for anything, but just numbers and never anywhere.
Yeah. I remember one maybe a couple of years ago, was it been longer than that time?
It was pre-COVID.
It was pre-COVID, at the time we spent, wasn't the price tag on it, 6 figures, I think it was pretty solid. Now, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to that, but.
Where
again,
does that
something to
money
think about.
come from?
I think, I'm not sure where they funded that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be another question, is like, how do you get those funds? You know what I mean, where could we get those from possibly?
Right.
And for the study,
Yeah.
oh, the county pays for it.
Okay.
Commissioners and
That's
council
what
has
I
to pay for the
figured.
county's budget.
Yeah.
I mean, if they wanna do it, that's who has to pay for it.
That was
I mean, there's no other funds for it. I mean, that's, one thing we could do is comparing statistically, we can look at, the census, in population growth, the last 10 years, 20 years, and we can see the EMS numbers. And that's an easy statistical analysis. There's, of course, when you hire a company to do that, they do other types of control measures. But really, for me as a fire chief, if I wanted to quickly look at it and see what my district has done, let's say, I'll look at how much the population has growth. I can then connect that to assessed value growth and really have a good picture to be able to make some quick decisions on what we need to do. But no doubt our run volume has increased, and no doubt 5-6 ambulances is not going to cover it. We have operated in deficit in Clark County and rolling the dice every day that hopefully we're going to be lucky. I think we can't continue operating that way. I think 8 ambulances is a minimum staff that we need 24 hours a day on duty. Really, all of them needing to be, majority of them need to be paramedic, all of them need to be ALS at minimum. I mean, it's just, we have rural areas that are far away from hospital, and we have close areas to the hospital, but even the demographic there may require that the patient receive at least ALS care, because they're elderly people coming from lower
Well, the
income
reality is,
areas.
paramedic on every ambulance, not gonna happen.
Not
Not
gonna
in
happen,
today's, not in today's.
I think you guys, I think Chapel's using this model a little bit on Metro, local Metro's using this model of where they're, you know, when they're zipping in these 5-minute or less runs, they're BLS in those because you don't have a chance. They're putting their, you know, they're putting their medics out in the county where the longer, you know, the
Yeah.
longer intervention times are, which makes sense, you know, if you're gonna run somebody in 3 minutes, you know, you can only do so much, so BLS is probably the right answer, to be
Well, I
honest.
think New Washington's number on their ISO thing they had yesterday, they just put out, they're 90-something square miles for New Wash.
Yep.
For their 2 or 3 area that they cover. We're 55 square miles in our area. We're only 15, 17 miles in theory in a straight line from the hospital, but yeah, some of our roads aren't straight there.
So Clark County has some unique challenges because for an ambulance service to cover with paramedic, they would have to put their paramedic somewhere where there's rarely calls. Now, when I say rarely, you know, you all get a couple of runs a day, New Wash gets 1 or 2 runs, maybe. So then you have a paramedic that's sitting there not being utilized for a lot of the calls that could use it closer to the hospital, and that is a challenge. Where you look at Louisville metro area, back when they started and J-Town didn't have an ambulance, or Middletown didn't have an ambulance, when they put that paramedic there, it was generating a lot of funds to support itself because they were still busy.
Well, that's-
Here it's not that way. If you put them in U Wash, they're not busy. They're going to be sitting
Well,
there.
you kind of have to strategically place your resources, and, you know, if you look at, if we're comparing, you know, we talked about Clark and Floyd County had 2,100 calls for 911 service for an ambulance last year. Clarksville, 4,907, Jeffersonville, 9,470, Sellersburg, 1,229. There's 3 cities right there that almost equal their county. The need for service is there, and it's only going to continue to grow.
I agree.
Well, I think the conversations that we just had, and we have some, EMS resources in New Washington. It's not there full time. Same with Monroe, same with Tri-Township. The duplication of efforts. I've listened many times a day where we're sending 2 ambulances to New Washington for a BLS run. Is that something that can be coordinated within this public safety plan to say, hey, New Washington, when you have an ambulance online, you're going on your own. If you need an ALS intercept, a flat car, intercept with Chief Musavi's crew, or any of those things, just find a way to coordinate those resources that we already have in place to try to improve services now instead of duplicating.
The only hesitation I would have with that, if I may, is in those areas, especially when we talk about New Washington or any part of the rural county, if they're taking their ambulance, that's all they got. They may need some backup. So we don't have heartburn sending trucks out, even if they've already got another ambulance going, because if they get there and they find, oh, I need more hands, we're at least on the way and headed that direction. I would hate for them to be there, find that they've had somebody that had a syncope episode, but they're actually coding, now I need more people, and we're gonna CPR 30 minutes to the hospital and not have them started.
I think that really needs to be discussed more at we need our 911 system enhanced to where they're triaging those runs on a protocol. So we're not sending just a bunch of stuff to a call that's a twisted ankle. A twisted ankle is 1 unit, doesn't require multiples of units to respond to it. That would then help this situation.
Unless he's 400 pounds.
Well, that is, but if they are, then that backup can go. But
Right.
we're not, sending resources just to send resources. They can always request additional resources if needed. The same way in our area, as we are growing our capabilities, there may be a day that we just need to coordinate. That, if we're going to a chest pain and I'm sending a paramedic, they're sending a BLS crew. I don't need a BLS crew to come to a chest pain. I already got it covered.
Well, I think
That BLS crew can go available for the next call, which inevitably there will be a next call. So let's not duplicate resources.
As we look at moving forward, I think those are some things too that we can hammer out when we look at mutual aid agreements and things like that, is what that transition looks like. When do we go out and things like that? I mean, I know traditionally mutual aid is, there's a pile up on 65 and we need all hands on deck, and absolutely. But I think as we look at how those services interact, because I think some redundancy in the counties, is what we need. I don't know that we need, 10 different services all racing to a call, but I think, having multiple options, to where we can backfill each other and things like that's important too.
I think you're gonna see issues with that moving forward because of the model that Floyd County took, so they're gonna have 2 ambulances and then Lafayette or Highlander covering their own area. So where is your mutual aid? Short of short of New Washington, New Chapel.
Well, they're not adequately staffed, meaning that they're not adequately resourced right now.
Right.
I think 3 ambulances for there is not going to be enough, but for our area, if we're talking about having 6, 7 ambulances from New Chapel, and let's say I have 1 or 2 available, then it does make more sense, because mutual aid needs to be for the system. That redundancy is system redundancy, not call redundancy. We don't need multiples of units to the same call. We need system redundancy, so when they're short-handed, like it happened just the other day, they were busy. So New Wash needs a paramedic, we send one. That is a redundancy within the system that is good. We're not going to every call that they need a paramedic. It's only when they don't have one available, then we're able to step in the system. And that's what makes that system work real well.
When you talk about redundancy, you're running 2 ambulances now?
1 is a staff.
So 1 staffed, so that's the thing. you watch what happens if they have an ambulance breakdown. It's a loss of resources. They don't have just extra ambulances sitting around.
They got a couple of them,
So,
and we're buying a third one, but, you know, those are the kind of discussions that eventually the commissioners and the council has to be involved. The new contract in Floyd County, the rumor is that, the Highlander is gonna get some funding from the county to cover their own area. And then AmeriPro is gonna contract for the rest of it. So, Chief of Newash is not here, so I'm gonna speak on his behalf. You know, you can't expect a volunteer department for the most part to provide that service with no funding from the county government.
and that's the issue that's kind of where, you know, we're in the situation that we're in. Is EMS is deemed a necessary service in the state of Indiana, but receives zero funding. So, we've all been around this game for a long time. I'm on year 25, get Worley's on 50. You know, we know the issues, but we've got to figure out a way to move forward to solve the issues.
Well, I mean, when you talk to the state senators, right?
Well, we've got
Archie was
the
here
House Bill
recently.
1302 that's coming up, that's gonna have every state's report and things like that. And I mean, literally what we're trying to turn that into is, you know, okay, whether that be, you know, the third-party payers and state Medicaid agency get better reimbursement, or if we can't, probably hopefully legislating, you know, X amount of funding per citizen like they do the public health thing or something along those lines, because I think it's gonna be very impressive when we see that whole statewide picture, just how unsustainable our services are across the state. There's maybe 10 counties that are in good shape out of 92.
I mean, we're the 27th richest county in the state.
But I mean, currently, like,
I mean,
the lawmakers that we talk to, they say, no, there's a mechanism in place. Your county can formulate a new tax to fund the EMS. So they said we have done that.
Scott County did it.
You know,
They're doing it
there's a-
very, 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 very well.
Harrison County has done it since 1970s. They have a EMS tax.
Scott County is the 82nd poorest county in the state, and they've got a top 5 ambulance service in the state. It can be done.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not saying it's not gonna be done, I just think, you know, that we need to keep advocating on the state level too to improve things, because I think there's a lot of disparities out there in the way it's funded, and I think this will bring that to light, so I agree. Well, kind of along those lines, I think I sent you guys all the public safety plans so you could see it, and I think it was, what, 2014, I mean, it's pretty old, and there's just some major language in there that I think was, you know, my concern is, you know, it talks about like intermediate level and levels of certification for EMS that don't exist and things like that. So, you know, I was looking through it on some certain things that, you know, my recommendation would be to look at and adjust and things like that. Because I mean, if we're gonna use this as our, you know, our guideline for provision of services, I think it needs to be up to date with the current situation, the current certifications and some things like that. So the first thing I put, there's a couple things that I think are no-brainers. Number one, taking that out, the different levels of EMT certification and intermediate and stuff like that don't exist. And if there is a change, we can always look at putting that back in. But, you know, for right now, I think it just needs to be, you know, EMT, advanced, paramedic level, sort of things like that. The other thing I thought was pretty, I guess, outdated is every single new employee, it says it has to be certified by the health officer. And you know, I'm not afraid to do the work, I'm happy to do that, but it just, you know, if with a state certification mechanism and things like that, it's just redundant.
But all we did when we were certified through the health officer was take a written roadmap test and a protocol exam. That was it.
Right.
When was the last one of those given, Ross?
It's been,
10 years?
Before COVID.
you know, something 10, it's probably been more like 7.
7? Yeah.
So my thoughts would be to write something of like, you know, and there are some clauses already in there, but say like, hey, if there is an issue, you know, that it can, you know, there can be, if we have a care issue or a, you know, dishonesty or ethical issue or something like that, you know, that we can reach out and, you know, to the services medical director, come up with some sort of mediation plan and things like that. And then if they wanted to appeal, bring it to the board and say, hey, health officer's overstepping his bounds here, I feel like it should be this, or some sort of appeal mechanism. But I don't know that as a health officer, number one, I think it's kind of a waste of effort on their part to have to run it through me. Honestly, you know, on my part, I'm not sure it's time.
Licensed through the state.
Well,
Exactly.
I always wondered why there was this duplication of certification, both with the personnel and the ambulances.
the original drafters had that in concern, that Operation Life were bringing in personnel from Martin and Owen County, and they didn't have a clue where they were going. And that's 89 to 93.
Pre-GPS kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that's where the rollback kicked in, because out of
So
county.
you're saying we're doing things the way we did in 1993?
Yes.
Yes. Well, there was probably no EVOC training back then,
Right.
either, so now there is, so.
Yeah. I
The
think,
one
you
in the
know,
ordinance is like, has certifications that 15 years, 20 years outdated.
right. Well, that's my thing, it's like, when I look through it, I can understand where a lot of these things came from, that I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense, and I think back, I'm like, oh, it actually makes complete sense, it was a a great document for the time, it's just some of these aspects are, just not up to date with the current situation. I think probably one of the big ones is the one on page 3 that talks about primary service provider and things like that. That's the one that says basically you have to have 4 ambulances in their designated service area, things like that. I think for the primary provider, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, I think it doesn't leave a lot of room for like a secondary provider in those scenarios.
Yeah, that's the first thing we talked about at the last meeting, was just changing that.
Yeah.
And one thing I did have in the, where was that? Maybe on the next amendment. About the 8-minute response, the 8-minute holding time on scene for the secondary provider.
That needs to go.
Yeah, where was that?
Too many unincorporated areas, you're never gonna do that, it's just reality.
I agree.
Part of the clinical needs.
Yeah, well, I think it puts, the provider in a bit of a trick bag to say, hey, we recognize that this patient needs to go now, but we're sitting here looking at our watch to see if it's, 8 minutes.
Mhm.
And that's when we're allowed to transport. I don't,
It's right in the middle, about 2/3 of the way down on the secondary one up there. It says, let's see. The secondary may provide 911 coverage in the event the primary cannot provide service within 8 minutes, or at the direct request of the primary. So if they say we can't get out
That's the
there,
thing, it's never been 8 minutes
Yeah.
before, even Henryville, if you watch, never has been, probably never will be.
Yeah.
There's so much area, there's so many unincorporated areas that in the perfect world, you just can't have 50 ambulances sitting out there.
do you want to say within the
Clinical
service
needs
time?
of the patient.
I think that's reasonable.
I think that's
something where it puts it doesn't bound the provider into a, town versus clinical setting. The only thing I read through last night.
I do think we have to be cognizant of, make sure that is used within the spirit of the rule.
Yes.
Because that does give some wiggle room to say, I'm gonna show up every time, be damned.
And that
because,
happened
you
in
know,
Floyd County,
yeah.
what, Jason, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
You had two providers racing to the scene to see who could get there first.
I think if we fix the other side of that ordinance where allows coordination between agencies to say, we're not sending 2 units to the same call,
Agree.
then those kind of things will resolve themselves. But those of us who've been doing this for 10, 15, 20, 30 years now, all know you show up to the front of a house and somebody runs in with the child in their hand and hand it to you because the child has burns all over. This idea that we're gonna wait 8 minutes will never happen. I will not follow that rule. No, none of my employees will follow that rule. We're gonna go.
Well, and I think that's the one that nobody has any problems with, but I do see a scenario where somebody's just gonna start cutting, it's like my area, I'm gonna come every single time, and I do think that needs to be within the spirit of the plan.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that our board can have some oversight on that, if we feel like that's getting abused, then we can say, okay, that's fine.
Well, I think that last sentence there, the second to last, was out, mutual agreement with other provider permitted by the Clark County Health Department. So I think that could be where we outline what that looks like.
I do like getting the 8 minutes, I agree. Okay, that makes sense to me. The other one, below that, we didn't have anything in there about interfacility transfers. And I will say, I am getting a lot, and I know a lot of people don't want to, well, that's the problem, a lot of people, that's the problem, nobody wants to do them. But, I'm getting a lot of complaints out of Clark and our standalones, and don't get me wrong, I have some frustration towards the standalones, because you build a standalone ER that is gonna have,
It doesn't solve the healthcare problem.
Yeah.
well, it's gonna have multiple transfers a day, anybody gets admitted, it's gonna be a transfer, you know, but there's not a lot of dialogue a lot of times between them and the local service provider. This is happening all over the state as these pop open. So, you know, you can't build this knowing there's gonna be 8 transfers a day and then just come up to the local service and be like, well, why aren't you getting all
You
my
have most of the
transfers?
transport being dictated by a standalone.
Yeah.
Well, and I think those standalones present a whole other challenge, in my opinion. They come in and they want to, use the 911 system, which is tax subsidized, and then we also now hold that provider to a response time to get to those standalones. Is that really a good system to have in place? I know like around Marion County, they've got a lot of standalones, and they have seem like a pretty good system in place with those standalones to get to the back to the, the mother hospital, so to speak. I mean, something. I don't know if we can.
Speaking on behalf of the hospital.
Right.
Their struggle and is simply ambulance availability for emergency calls, other runs, ALS availability for ALS patients. But then the current ordinance that says if it's within Clark County, you can't utilize anybody but the primary provider. If the primary provider is not available, at what point do we say, you know, the heck with the ordinance and do what's best for the patient? Compound problems and the newest freestanding ER, the medical center, is Clark's name for the new freestanding just on the east end of Jeff. Due to a issue with MRI and state regulations, they have a waiver that says they have to transfer their patients within 60 minutes. So they have a different organization than EMS saying, well, you gotta get them out. You know, don't care how you get them out, but you gotta get them out.
Yeah.
And you know what, even if that was changed and there was another ambulance, I can tell you the other ambulance provider that's around, they have the same problems with staffing. You know, they're
Sure.
contracted for other areas and their hospital calls for transfer, and they're given an 18 to 20 to 24 hour ETA before they can get an ambulance.
AMR has a contract with the University of Louisville. They literally have a separate resident checkout where they're like, okay, I got this guy waiting for a scan. Oh, and they're like, oh, do you have any AMR patients? Like, oh, this guy's been here for a day and a half. I mean, it's constant.
As a general rule, it is not a good idea for us to dictate to a private business, especially like a hospital, how do they take care of their patients to get them from their care center to another care center?
And hospitals have great relations with New Chapel.
No, I mean, I'm talking in general, because that is happening everywhere now.
I do think it's also though a double-edged sword. You can't say, well, we've got this regulation that says we gotta get them out in 60 minutes. Your problem to fix it. You know, they have to have some skin in that game too. That being said, I think they're willing to put some skin in that game. You know, I think they're willing to say, you know, our transport service in times where they can't get there in a timely manner is willing to do it. You know, and I think that's hard to say no to when you have when our provider says it may be a couple hours before I get there, and they say I have somebody that can get there in 30 minutes. It's hard one to say no to when you're looking after the patient's best interest.
Right, and then, even, I'm not sure the schedules of any of the Norton ambulance transport units or anything like that, but, Baptist Floyd's, I think they cut off at midnight or something along those lines.
Norton's runs 24/7, but they staff down at night. I think they don't run 2 ambulances at night.
Yeah.
So that's what they're running in Floyd County, right, too, for the hospital owns 2 ambulances.
Yeah, I think they just do. I think they're just doing.
So 2 if they can staff it.
Yeah.
But I think there's gotta be a way to pull those inter-facility transfers that are not true 911 calls out of the system, but also maintain the needs of the hospitals and these standalone facilities, because I think they do bring some relief to the main ER system, but not, are we taxing one system to relieve another, kind of,
I mean, it's like Ford right now having their ambulances, Ford Memorial basically. You know, if Clark wants to have 2 ambulances or 1 ambulance per day, I think they should be able to, for their own inter-facility transfers. That's their business. They need to have that redundancy to be able to do that.
I think personally, if our primary service provider is okay with that, I think that's fine. I do think we have to, give them the first right of refusal. That would be my preference in that scenario.
I think the problem is that if, let's say, every 2 years you change contractors, that hospital can't plan for that. It's not like they can just spin up an ambulance service tomorrow. So if they're gonna do it, they need to be able to do it, at least have one or two available. Because if we're extending a long-term contract to somebody, that's one thing. If they're not, every 3 years, they have to kind of wonder what happens next.
But then what, on the, just the devil's advocate, what happens when that service isn't available 24/7, you know? And a lot of them aren't. I mean, there's been patients
Well, I think the
flowing,
stipulation
there's been
maybe-
patients flowing from River Ridge to Floyd Memorial, you know,
13 miles.
which is absolutely unacceptable in my eyes.
$40,000.
We're landing a helicopter in the middle of 10th Street.
Yeah,
It's
and
like-
and that's happened day and night. You shut down the middle of 10th Street because there's nowhere to land a helicopter.
I think the board should put in
I like your verbiage here.
I think it kind of
So,
splits the difference.
I know
you know,
it's
if you're not, if the primary service provider is not available within 90 minutes, then an alternative can be used, and, you know, in an acute life-threatening emergency, you know, and just devil's advocate, but Clark calls New Chapel doesn't have any paramedics available, we've got a patient on a ventilator, patient with multiple drugs, doesn't have anybody available, it's gonna be an hour or two, we go to plan B, you know, immediately. That's an emergent patient versus a, you know, I've gotta go for a urinary tract infection or something less acute.
I would like to see an out in that scenario where it's like, this is a time-dependent condition, somebody that's gonna go to IR for stroke, go to the cath lab, something. I think in that, all this, you know, bureaucracy's gotta go out the door and you just get them where they need to go.
Well, it's the same analogy as a mirror, you know, somebody comes running out with a baby, you know, in a critical situation, you deal with it, you know.
And that being said, I mean, I don't get a lot of pushback in those scenarios. I think we're all doing that.
Yeah.
But it'd be nice to have a clause in the safety plan. It's like we're not just willfully ignoring the safety plan. We've got some clauses
I
in
think
there.
there
that
could be
say-
stipulation in the hospital though too, like a large one like Clark, if they say, hey, we want to do our own ambulances, you say to them, okay, that has to be 24-hour coverage, because also they can't play this game that from this time I got an extra staff because we're gonna, no, either you provide this service 24 hours a day.
Well, when this
You know.
came up, not right, it's a state level thing, but you'd have to apply for a waiver in that scenario, and you would have to have the consent of whoever the backup provider is that's gonna cover you after hours to be able to do that
Well,
scenario.
now, you know, we have some non-medical folk here. We always talk about time sensitive, every minute counts. You know, here's a perspective on how every minute counts. Every second that a stroke happens, 39,000 brain cells die. Every single hour that passes, that's the equivalent of your brain aging 3 years. That's a scientific fact. So when we talk about time that matters, I think what you're saying is right. You got that stroke patient that you need to get from Clark over to some comprehensive stroke, you use whoever can get there the quickest. When I worked EMS in Louisville, we were 911 only. I can't tell you how many times you walk into Suburban or something and they're like, hey, we've got this critical patient. You call the supervisor, we're like, hey man, we gotta get this kid or this patient from point A to point B. You get approval, and it happened. And it happened.
That's the model that's
7
happening
years
all
ago.
over the state. Just exactly, these places say, we don't do inter-facility transfers, but then that's the caveat. If it's a time-dependent condition of somebody's gonna get an intervention, that they get to the destination facility, all bets are off. And that essentially is a 911 kind of transfer. Okay. So the other stuff on here, really, a lot of it is, again, back to this, 60 days by the health officer, changing the advanced side of things. I think there's anything
I
else
had a
that's.
question on number 10, or the item on page 10, it says drop A, is that referring to 101.8?
I don't have.
I got it up here.
A lot of it was where it was parsing out like volunteer ambulance versus, just a regular provider. I think it's that.
Page 10, there was 2 A's on that, or 3 A's on that page.
Yeah, I think we need to go down.
I just wasn't sure what it was in reference to.
I think it maybe is that, go back up, that first one.
I think it's under section 11018, permit required, I think. 'Cause
That's
the other
that
one is
was the one that
insurance.
was most logical, no personal organization shall operate an ambulance service or any healthcare care, blah, blah, blah.
No, I'm okay with, I don't have necessarily a problem with that one. 2 years or
The
so.
other ones are insurance related.
Yeah, come on down to that, I think it might be this. Yeah, on capacity. Basically, a lot of these I'm trying to take away kind of the unilateral, like I can just, you know, as health officer do all this, you know,
Sure.
a lot of things that,
On that page.
Yeah, I think it may be, well, PDF page 11.
3 A's in it.
yeah. Yeah, cause that's 11 now, so maybe, I'll have to go back to my notes on that, to be honest with you, so I'll review.
This is the only question I had.
So what, and just, I know we have a couple more to hammer through on this, but what I was gonna do is take the feedback here, you know, revise some of these, and then give you guys a proposed draft to say this is what we're all comfortable with, moving forward, so. Yeah, I'll have to go back and review that, to be honest with you.
And 11.
Oh, the next big one I have is that on 12, the response time thing. We kind of touched on this already. Is my preference would be, instead of just saying our goal is, you know, 12 minutes or something, that we at the first meeting of the year or some, you know, consistent annual thing, we look and say, all right, let's look at each municipality and what are our target response times, instead of just saying, you know, we want to shoot for 12 minutes for the whole county this year. I think we set targeted goals. And then if there's a certain municipality that doesn't meet target 2 months in a row, say, hey, what's going on here, what can we look at, was the one, that was my proposal on that, on the response times.
On 101.11, that should be, that one, this one here.
I think this is where we're getting into it.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
The only conversation I have about that on the response times, and you and I had this talk the other day when we spoke about it. Response times to me are extremely misleading, like you said before. I would love to see a tiered level of response. You and I talked about it. If you respond 1 minute to a cardiac arrest and 19 minutes to a swollen ankle, you know, you average those times, that's a 10-minute response time. That doesn't truly indicate what we're doing as a provider or as a county in responding to those emergencies. I would like to see if we're gonna have a time frame, that's fine, but I would also like to see some sort of tiered response from 911 that says, although this time crept above 12 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, here's a breakdown of what happened in that municipality or that organization or that community. And, you know, on our high level cares, we were within 5 minutes. On our lower cares, we were at 15 minutes. And I think that's a more clearer picture of what we're providing than just this overall number. It's been said here multiple times that I don't necessarily know that 10 minutes in this county is doable by any stretch of the imagination. So,
And to just to second that, they've done multiple studies. Any response time over 5 minutes, no matter how close or how long, has never been shown to impact mortality. I'm not saying we still caution the wind and say, you know, but like, I agree that cutting, you know, a lift assist response from 50 minutes to 40 minutes, you know, doesn't have any real clinical impact outside of just, you know, being kind to our patients.
And what you
But cutting
run
a
into
full
there is-
arrest from 10 to 5,
What you're
like
into
that.
is the customer service side of it. right?
Yeah.
And are
Most
we-
People are, what do you mean I'm laying in the floor not hurt for 25 minutes for
Right.
an ambulance to get here? But I agree with him, you know, you
Yeah.
can break it down and say, hey, on our urgent calls, you set the criteria for what's considered urgent. Hey, you got a 7-minute average. For lift assist, non-injuries, things like that, maybe we are averaging 15, maybe we are averaging 18.
I agree.
But to lump it all in together and throw it all out there and say, well, it was, 17 minutes for a new wash. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, probably
Well,
was.
I think maybe.
There's no parameters though for that. When you call 911 right now, if it's a twisted ankle or a full arrest, you're getting a squad sent, code 3, if there's one available.
But it can't happen because Louisville's done it. Louisville has done it and they put triage in there, and so they would label them Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo. So your Echo level calls were your highest level, so it elicited, fire to go with an EMS. If it was my ankle's been swollen for 3 weeks, that's a lower acuity call. We're gonna get to it, but that's been done in other cities.
Well, he seems Brad, but from 911 side of things, is that something you guys think you can parse out?
Well, that's what I was gonna say, and I'll have Chris chime in here because he's a national supervisor, but, I think that if it goes that route, there's gotta be a set definition, something for them to follow, and Chris, feel free to chime in on, I think the liability, I don't think you wanna push it off, I don't wanna speak for 911 or Brad or any of them, but, it seems like you kind of push that liability of making that determination, what happens if they make the wrong determination, and something impacts. some sort of, maybe same sort of protocols that EMTs or paramedics have can be done for.
They're doing it for EMD currently, right, Chris?
Yes. Is it a
So I mean, you know,
modified
the
EMT or-
facility's there, I mean, they're already triaging. I would assume that EMD has some sort of modification for severity levels or,
The EMD system does, but there's nothing countywide in place.
Yeah,
As
I
far
know.
as, it's basically, I guess the easiest way to describe it is we basically use it as a determination of whether or not the fire department's gonna respond with the ambulance. There's no
right.
set criteria of, hey, this is a third-party call, we dispatch it, and then they handle it as based on their protocols.
And if I remember correctly, when Louisville first started doing it, they had actually hired a nurse, I think, for the grant, brought them in to the dispatch center, and that's what they did, they triage calls. So they would say, hey, back then, Yellow Ambulance was still around, and they would roll those lower acuity calls from the 911 center over to the private provider.
Indiana's gonna be a CARES registry state soon, so we'll get all the response times on our cardiac arrests and things like that. I think that's the first step, is seeing if we can parse out that, okay, how fast we get to our full arrest. And then I don't know if there's a way to pull people who got advanced airways or, some different ways to pull the most acute to see what time, what our time frames look like for that.
Well, and that's always been the fight with the local fire chiefs, because you have one department wants to do this, one department wants to do that, but the county set up protocols that it's breathing, bleeding, or delayed dispatch, or delayed response time, then fire dispatch. You've got some fire departments that will be dispatched on every single run. You've got some, so they tried to keep it simple for central, because you don't want to put that on that dispatcher. There's only one dispatcher in there handling fire and ambulance right now, which is unrealistic in my mind, and most everybody else's that's ever run an emergency run. And when you call her for dispatch, and sometimes they're answering another run, or they're talking to Jeff City Fire on a working house fire, Amir's got a working rescue, Monroe's got this going on. It's unrealistic for that one dispatcher. So for one dispatcher to have to now start triaging calls and trying to figure out what order they need to go in, until there's at least 2 or so dispatchers in there, I don't think it's ever gonna be.
I think that's why we don't have the full EMD implemented really. And right now, we're operating kind of 2 dispatchers. We're driving a run, handing it to New Chapel, which we brought up before. Does New Chapel even have an EMD process? I don't know if there is.
I'd love to hear.
We're already doing what we say now. I mean, obviously, if you get a call over a cardiac arrest and you get a call over a sprained ankle, you already prioritize that in your mind. New Chapel or Tri-Township or whatever. All I'm saying is why, if you're gonna go through the process of cleaning up this ordinance and looking at the verbiage in the ordinance, let's look at the process that's there and fix the process to make us more efficient. And then that allows us to really look at criteria in a way that you can really see, are we efficient or are we not efficient? And where aren't we efficient, how do you fix that, instead of trying to fix this whole entire problem? There has to be an easier way to prioritize those calls, and then it allows us, from a customer care perspective, when they call it a 911, that you can tell that person, we have an immediate care call before you, it may be a few minutes longer before we respond. That way, when you do respond on scene, those people that are responding are not catching hell because they've waited 20 minutes. They've been previously notified that call may be a little bit more longer than normal.
Well, and that's what
You're gonna get
the
phone calls.
providers,
You're gonna get phone calls.
Well, I
because
understand,
people
but I
don't-
think-
their emergency is the most important.
And while I don't disagree with that, I think we all have, you all are public safety professionals. You already do this in your brains every day, is prioritize your calls. So all I'm saying is it allows us to look at data more specifically and pull out what's more important compared to what's not important.
And it's very, very hard to do that, and I agree with you, but, the problem is now is everything's litigation driven. 10 years ago, I had abdominal pain for 2 weeks. When it finally got so bad, I drove myself to the ER. Had I called an ambulance, I would have been placed on that lower acuity. I had a blood clot and was halfway dead, literally.
But let me ask you a question,
So-
though. You probably would have already been prioritized down the list anyway, correct?
Probably, once I called, but you're probably looking at, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I live with Jeff, so I'm gonna get service faster than New Washington.
I do think though, if we have concrete data, you're right, we're gonna get those phone calls. But like if I have concrete data, you know, obviously those calls are much easier to explain, and hey, you know, well, here's what's going on. I have, you know, these response times versus right now, it's just kind of listen, sorry, we're working on it. If I can say, well, our response times for critical level is this, our response times for, you know, customer service related EMS runs is this, and some things like that. It's a lot easier to respond versus, you know, when you don't have that kind of data too. So, like say you get bad, you know, and say, hey, you took me too long with my belly pain, you know, I can pull those runs and say, you know, we had 2 high level calls at the same time that, you know, we got out there in 5 minutes, and I apologize for the delay, but sometimes those things happen.
Well,
and
one other thing,
continue
here's
to
where this
progress.
is really gonna come into play, and this is important moving forward, because we've talked a lot about money and dollars and fiscal sense and fiscal responsibility. I would expect that if this group goes before the council and says, hey, we need more dollars for more ambulances, if I was on that council, these are the questions that I would ask. You know, if you need more ambulances, why is that the case? Well, our run times are 17 minutes in this area. Well, I look and see, like, you know, for example, in New Washington, we're making 1 run a day. So is it real, does it make fiscal sense to add an ambulance to stay in New Washington? So we drop that 17 minutes to 8 minutes, whereas, you know, Jeff's making so many calls a day. I mean, there's just questions that we need to drill down into and get good, hard answers before you look towards adding more money to the problem. I mean, that's all I'm saying. It gives credibility to your argument that you need more dollars if you have more facts to back it up.
I think one other thing that is on this is the ambulance getting to the scene average response time. There's one other factor that's not, because the fire department gets to the scene quicker. So that may be a little bit, so when we're talking about response time, are we talking about the actual physical ambulance getting there versus the first responders who are getting there and providing care until the ambulance gets there?
Well, I think we all know response times are, you know, they're notoriously inaccurate for so many different confounders, and, you know, some of the national EMS agencies are actually getting ready to release a statement saying, you know, just looking at a hard response time is probably not the, you know, the best index of care. That's why we use the job forms. You know, I think we get valuable information from those, and especially when dispatch puts in like, hey, this was the response time and there were X amount of other runs in the county. That gives me a feel for real time, what's going on out there and things. And I think it's much more useful than, yeah, there was a 1 run to, you know, a Tisco that took, you know, 30 minutes or something. It's, you know, getting a feel for the day in, day out coverage. And that's one other thing I wanted to put in there, let everybody's thoughts on that. I know it's a source of frustration for you guys when we say this, but we'd love to have some sort of location tracking capabilities for our coverage. You know, I think in this day and age, I think that's important. And honestly, not to, you know, get in people's hair all the time, but, you know, we want to help and say, okay, where is everybody?
No, I think you have that responsibility when you're paying subsidy. I mean, you have a right to know where your resources are.
Agreed.
Well, and Matt and them all do a good job, because when you're listening, they sort of do what you're talking about. If they get 2 or 3 runs at one time, squad 2 is going to this run, squad 6 is going here. I don't know if they're ALS or BLS, but then when a run comes in for something more emergency, then squad 6 is being diverted to this run, and squad 2, you know, it's a chess game, like I said.
Change the call
last
sign.
meeting.
If you're an ALS unit, you're medic 6 instead of squad 6.
We're doing
They're moving
I mean,
squads
that
around
identifies it right
right
there.
now to
Solves
try
the
to do
problem.
what we're talking about. So some of that has to be up to the provider, whether it's them or the county or AMR or whoever it is. They have to be able to rely on moving their units around and not have one person at central that doesn't know who's BLS, ALS, or whatever, and now doesn't even know where they're coming from, because now you're gonna have to ask squad 6, even if you say advanced squad 6, where are you coming from? You're going to New Wash, where are you coming from? You know.
And I think it'll be a double-edged sword, to be honest. I mean, are we gonna find out sometimes running with less units than we'd like? Yeah, I think we'll probably find that out. But on the flip side, like when I get a call, if it took, you know, too long to get there, I can also look and say, well, there's 2 units down at U of L, 1 over at Clark, 1 that's actively making a run out there, you know. It's not just the, you know, for complaint side of things, it's, hey, you know, gives us a picture of what's going on. You know?
We're also doing that, whatever, you were saying, we're doing that just for public disclosure. We're putting, when our unit rolls out as a medic unit, it goes in as medic 318. When it goes as a ALS or BLS, it goes as squad 318. So one, the dispatchers would know that there's a paramedic going or not going, and
But as
the
that
public
filters
is
out,
listening.
we got fire that learn, that knows that who's coming, what level of care, you have police, you start to figure that out, and then you can track your assets.
Yeah.
Well, for that, it's a good discussion, and what I'll do is kind of take some of that feedback from this and maybe put a rough draft together, get it out to everybody look, and then maybe next meeting, we can say yay or nay to the draft and move forward from there. Does that sound reasonable? I guess probably should get a motion for that, so.
Make motion.
Second.
I kind of talked about the interfacility transfer side of things already in that safety plan discussion. So, next thing I had on there was some mutual aid. I think there's been some discussion for you guys. Any updates between New Chapel and Tri-Township on mutual aid?
We have sent a draft, we're waiting for them to kind of review it, and see if they have any input and what they want changed or stay the same or whatever. We will hammer that out as we have time.
Gotcha. Next I have on there, state update. Main thing I kind of talked about it already is just the Hospital 1302 reports that the questions are, I think, getting finalized first of the week. Probably go out to everybody June 1st. Those are to be turned in by July. I think it's mid-July is the date for that. And basically it's going to talk about, every county is going to turn in, what response, actually is going to have some response time data, some other things, coverage data. We'll give the state a comprehensive list of what's going on out there. I think it'll be nice from a transparency side of things. It'll be nice because, I get some calls from other counties of, EMS is a mess up here. We also haven't invested $1 in EMS in the last, 5 years sort of thing. So it'll kind of let you see what your county's doing compared to other counties and hopefully be a springboard to some improvements, both from a funding side of things, reimbursement side of things and stuff like that. Other things going on, there's a lot of grants out there. Some of the trauma commission grants went out, and being from where we are, you won't be shocked to hear, I don't think there are any grants that went out south of Interstate 70. So if you're thinking about anything from a trauma side of things that, you can apply for, I think grants would be very well received. They didn't get any applications, so that's the thing, is like I can grumble about it all going to, India North, but nobody's applying. And, I think they would love to fund some projects down in our area. So, anything you can think of that's even loosely related to trauma, get with me and I can help get some applications together. I'd have to remove myself from the actual process.
I do have a question about the mutual aid agreements. If we proceed and sign an agreement, does that require the approval then of this board? Or is the mutual aid agreement, the way you all see it, just between our agencies? How do you all want to proceed with mutual aid agreements in the county?
I feel like it's within the county, we're our own entity as a county. I think the whole network of first responders, we depend on each other. I don't think we should inhibit that.
Now, on the fire side, that doesn't exist. On the fire side, even though we're across border from each other, we have a mutual aid agreement with each other. I just want to know what we need to do. If we sign one, do we then submit it to this board, or do we just submit it to the Clark County Health Department and say, here's our agreement?
I think, the public safety plan, at least in the past, says you have to have as a primary service provider mutual aid agreements. What I think, from our side of things, it needs to be a viable mutual aid agreement, that says you actually, have something in place where you're not saying, oh yeah, some service out of India will come down and help if we're in a bind. So I think it needs to be viable, but as far as the nuts and bolts of that, I don't know that we, should have the purview of.
In the context of Clark County, our agency with mutual aid, if we just sign it, we just submit it to you all?
I think we probably need to review it, make sure it's consistent with the goals of the safety plan, but as far as, nitpicking every detail, I don't know that that's our purview.
Do you want us then to wait until the safety plan is finalized before we do our portion of it? Ours is pretty standardized, the one we have, because it's the same one New Wash has with New Chapel, so we basically use that and just change the language a little bit, but.
I would probably recommend go ahead and move it forward. I think the sooner we get that, in place, the tighter we are as far as making sure we're following all the regulations and things. I don't know that anything we talked about today would massively impact.
No, I think ours is pretty.
What's everybody think?
Is it relatively easy?
Yeah, ours basically, I think says if they call, we go assist them. If we call, they come assist us, which we're kind of doing that now.
We're ready to do it.
I'd like to make a suggestion on that. Me personally, I think if you're gonna have a mutual aid agreement, I think it should be submitted to the Clark County Health Department and let the attorney review that and at least have a recommendation from this board to the health department, and have the health department approve it, because then it goes through a process and it becomes a legal document. That would be my suggestion, and I think it covers this board, I think it covers the health department, and it covers the county.
I mean, it has nothing legal in it except who's in charge and command and stuff that are incident management related.
And I'm not so sure you
Yeah.
can't come up with like a template that's a standard template that the health department could draft, and when you enter a mutual aid agreement, you just fill in that particular information and make it a standard document. But
That's something we could work with.
until then, I just think you need to have some sort of legal review and have it voted on or approved by the health department.
I think we need to have input in that because there's a lot of language in there about incident management. Like, how do we manage an incident? That's not an attorney thing generally. It's, how do we manage an incident? Is who's in command? What happens when a high-ranking individual arrives? Those are not legal stuff necessarily, those are operational stuff. So each department is a little bit different when it comes to mutual aid on and how do we manage incidences. So I leave that to you all to figure out.
That's something we can.
But fire service been doing that for decades and we haven't had any really.
Because once, like I said, once that's cleaned up, that may be something New Washington would have to re-sign so that both mutual aid agreements are the exact same, they've been approved by the lawyers, and like you said, and then that way both of them are identical.
That would be my preference, is some uniformity to that, so we're not like, oh, their mutual aid says they can do this and that, so yeah, I would prefer some uniformity to mutual aid.
And I would think you could probably have Doug keep those on file at the health department, and that way we've got a record of that.
So do we wait or not wait?
Why don't you submit it and then we'll go through this process.
Okay.
And
All right.
we'll go ahead and submit it. I don't think we need to wait for the plan to submit it,
Okay.
but I do think, when you submit it, then we can sit down, hammer through it and, make any suggestions to it, changes and things like that. And then hopefully if it's something we all agree on, then we can say, okay, this may be our boilerplate contract moving forward or something
I will
like that.
work with these fine gentlemen here.
You can do that.
Yeah, exactly. Let you go down that road. Next thing I have on there is fire department updates. So,
The only thing I could say is probably for response times, an easy way maybe to get some documentation would be is like if engine 42 from Jeff's dispatched on an EMS run in their district, it takes them 4.2 minutes to get there. That's giving you some roundabout numbers. For Monroe, if Monroe has a run on Pixie Knob Road or something, and like I say, during the day from 8 to 6, we have a squad there, or we have 3 firefighters there. If it takes them 7.2 minutes to get there, then in theory, if there's a squad sitting in Monroe Township, then that should be pretty much what the response time would be if that squad's sitting there. Or same thing with Charleston. I don't think, except for Borden, I think every other volunteer fire department in Clark County is staffed during the day from at least 8 to 5. New Washington may be 7 to 4 or something like that, but anyway, from somewhere around there, every firehouse except for Borden is staffed during the day. So you should be able to get some kind of times from that. Now, again, then after 6 o'clock, then numbers start getting skewed because our ambulance isn't there or isn't manned after 6. Or whatever, but like I say, Jeff, engine 42 or engine 41 or whatever, you should be able to get, Central can pop some of them numbers out and be able to say that the average response time for Charlestown Fire on an EMS run is this, just to give you some numbers.
And I think the Borden numbers throw everything off because like Borden, yesterday, New Chapel had an unconscious, unresponsive out to Huber, I think, somewhere. Well, so then nobody got out from Borden, so they got on the radio and requested backup from us, so we sent an ambulance. Well, that response time is extensive, coming from 60 all the way to Huber. Luckily, they got there quicker than us, and they were able to determine that the patient didn't need additional care. They were ALS, so they transported and we canceled. But
well, throw another monkey wrench in that when they go to closest most appropriate, here in a year or two, I mean, that's gonna be probably Highlander. That's the closest to a lot of those.
right,
And some of those runs up there.
I know.
They still do it.
And some of those runs up there are coded differently, it's, dual dispatch contact Floyd County for this one. But I think the issue is, we've got board and fire department that we volunteer, but we have to wait 6 to 10 minutes before dispatching again. And then, because it goes, 6 to 10 minutes and they get a second knockout, and we wait, an additional 6 minutes and then they go to the next closest. That's a whole other issue that needs to be worked out.
Well, maybe on EMS, that might get changed if it's a structure fire or something like that. Maybe you leave that alone, but this committee should be able to say, hey, within 3 minutes of the EMS run, if nobody answers, we're starting somebody else. We join with them up on top of the hill up there by Jackson Road, Bartle Knob. That may mean we get started going up that way, or that may mean Amir gets started out Highway 60.
I think one thing that, we probably haven't talked about, and I think we all know it's happening, and it's always happening, and probably always will, is we kind of go back to the convalescent runs, right? How many times is an ambulance not available? And it's not just these guys, it's been that way for the history of the county. How many times has an ambulance not been available because all of your ambulances were out on convalescent transports? In my opinion, I think if you're gonna contract an ambulance service, they're contracted for 911, period. Now you don't have an overabundance of runs. Private ambulance services, yes, they can be nonprofit or whatever else. The reality is, they're there to make money. Convalescent transports are there. Someone will put in for that contract for those convalescent transports, or you've got Norton, you've got Heartland, you've got all these other people that can handle the convalescent stuff. The county's gonna choose to stay with a contracted provider, or provided for 911 service, period. Short
I
of,
think you can absolutely expect that subsidy to skyrocket then, because that's the only.
okay, so what's gonna happen with the subsidy with the recent developments in Floyd County? How is that gonna affect the subsidy at the end of next year?
I can't look into the future and say that, but what I can say is I know the contract in Floyd County had been pushed off year after year after year after year. We negotiated our contract a couple years ago and locked into a 3-year rate. I truly don't expect this astronomical number to come back that's been thrown around today. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm not disagreeing with you, they can't find a way that the convalescent runs don't take away from emergency services, but you can absolutely expect that subsidy to go through the roof, that that private company is not allowed to make convalescent runs, knowing they're paid runs.
Right?
I think it's important, I think it is important to note, though, that Dr. Hayes has already kind of talked about the fact that he's getting some complaints from some of these facilities about getting those non-emergency transfers moving because we're focused on 911. I think that the history of, all the ambulances are tied up on dialysis because we have 13 dialysis patients today. That's just not the case anymore. We don't do any dialysis. If you ask any of my employees today where Fresenius dialysis center is, they wouldn't know how to spell Fresenius. They just don't have that same, it's not the same dynamic that it once was. Now, discharges out of the hospital, absolutely, that's still a thing. A lot of the nursing homes even, the dynamic has changed where they have their own transport vans now, because if you don't meet a strict qualification for stretcher transport, you don't get paid, or you get in trouble if you do get paid, and we're not gonna get in trouble. So you see, Providence Nursing Home has their own stretcher or wheelchair vans now. All of these places are doing their own stuff because they just don't qualify for stretcher transport like they used to, and if they do, they have to wait.
To that point, Lynx Ambulance has one standing at Salisbury. I was just talking with him. We didn't know. It's just parked there, and today they were going with lights down the road. I'm like, are they transporting a site patient with lights inside? I don't know what they're doing, but they were. So they're parked there now. I'm not sure if there's a contract with that nursing home.
I think back to your point, what I do want to say is I understand exactly what you're coming from, and I don't disagree. I don't think a convalescent run should take away from your emergency runs. I absolutely agree with that. But I do think that if we go to a system where we know what runs are and we drill down into those runs, and levels of runs or tiers of runs, you should be able to look and see whatever providing services, whether it's New Chapel or AMR or whoever it is, and look and say, well, this month you made this many emergency runs and we couldn't, you didn't respond to this on a 12-minute run, but at the same time, we saw you were making a convalescent run. I mean, you should be able to drill down in that. We're sophisticated enough, we can drill down into that.
But that would mean
Then
that
I
the
think that's
contract
a-
would have the disclosure clause in there that says you have to disclose every run that you make in Clark County.
Then I
They would
think
have
as
to
those
provide
times
that.
come back here to this committee,
Yeah.
then this committee has the credibility to look into that and say, well, our run times are creeping up, and we notice that on these level 1 calls that are emergency calls, those times are creeping up, but your convalescent run numbers in the month of February were above this number. So we can deduce that you all are making more convalescent runs than your emergency runs. That's, I mean, there
Yeah.
has to be a.
Just on that
I think
point,
there's a
there
fallacy in the numbers you have to watch.
Yeah.
You know, when you talk about public perception, when somebody hears a response time is, 15 minutes, they automatically think that's on a full arrest. They don't, and then when you say, oh no, it was, it took an extra 10 minutes to get somebody back to the nursing home that was discharged. That's a little different, different situation.
Well-
And I think parsing that out is important.
When you talk about numbers a lot, we need to be knowing we need to know how many paramedics are working today. Right? How many paramedics do we have in the county working at any given time, versus what the contract calls for?
That's what I think that the control in the contract has to be, the disclosure and then other controls that are put in to know daily.
Well, let's, last thing I have on the agenda, public comments. So,
I just have a question. Listening to all this, and y'all doing a great job, by the way. Brian, I'm really glad to see you here too. So on those numbers, on the convalescent runs versus the emergency runs of any type, so those numbers are melded somewhere? We have data for that somewhere?
The
On-
911 is 21,000, I don't know about
No,
convalescents.
that's what I'm saying. We know how many runs of an emergency type via 911, but the convalescent runs, we don't have that data at this time.
Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly the reason for my comment.
right, exactly. I'm backing up on that. So, I mean, that's the big piece of the pie that we have to have.
I think in future contracts, with the government subsidy, it needs to be in there, that we have to have disclosure of your staffing structure, how many people are on duty as paramedic, how many transfers you're making that are non-convalescent, because we may be subsidizing transfers.
Right.
Well, I think
really don't want to.
Just for some perspective in the room, we did 27,000 calls total last year. I mean, it's not, we're not doing 40,000 transfers a year and 30,000 out.
No, we know that.
It's very much
So
lopsided. the other direction.
27,000.
So that's 6,000 convalescent times, that's 500 a month.
Right.
Total runs for New Chapel.
Well, I mean, that is the number right there.
Plus a day.
Well, but that's 2 counties, right?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I understand funding
That's-
issues.
So you're 27,000, we did 2,100 calls for Floyd County last year. And so those numbers are not hard to.
5,000-ish convalescent calls.
Right. It's not, we're not bogged down on the scheduled transfers. We currently, for a scheduled transfer, for like a doctor's appointment or wound care, things like that, you've got 1 of 2 time slots before lunch and 1 of 2 time slots after lunch. And that's after we book those. We don't hold 30 runs on the board like we used to when, was a dispatcher. It's just, we can't do that. That's not sustainable. So we're trying to schedule those in a way that's responsible for the service contract that we have with Clark.
And I think the point is, when we realize that, say, okay, when we negotiate a new contract, we need to decide how we're gonna handle those convalescent runs. If we're gonna look at something different, I think you're right, if you're saying, okay, we're, by giving up those convalescent runs and just focusing on 911, that's gonna take X percentage of our income away, and that subsidy ask may go up. I don't know that's necessarily, bad, and that's, in that scenario.
I mean, that model, Evansville does that, AMR, big player in the market, AMR only does 911 service now, they have been for a few years. Because they basically said, okay, this is what it costs to give up those transfers.
Sure, and I
And it's
think that's
$5,000.
exactly my point is if you're gonna go down that road, then you can fully expect that subsidy to go up tremendously because they're not gonna make those paying convalescent runs. And I'll add to that, I mean, if you're talking about, I know there was conversations at the last meeting that I wasn't aware of, I apologize for not being here. But at the last meeting, when it was discussed that this be, you know, we look at this countywide service, well, if you're sitting on the fiscal board of the county, if you're on the county council, obviously that county council wants to make those convalescent runs because that helps fund your entire department. I mean, you have to find ways to bring in revenue to that department. It can't just be, it can't be totally subsidized. So there has to be a happy medium, and if this board wants to go down the road of saying, well, you can only run so many, convalescent runs a month or whatever, then you're playing with that subsidy in a way that's either going to increase it or decrease it.
And I understand everything that's being said, I really do. And I'm just gonna say this without getting upset. As a paramedic that's worked for 25 years in and around this county and seen the things that I've seen in and around this county, it's pretty disappointing. So as a paramedic, I'm disappointed. As a taxpayer, I'm beyond irate.
Disappointed in how? Define disappointed.
There's a lot of things that I'm not gonna talk about publicly while things are being filmed, but I'd love to have a conversation with you and tell you exactly what I've seen.
As long as it's factual, I'd be glad to have the conversation. As long as it's factual, I'd be glad to have the conversation. No innuendos, no stories, no I heard this, no rumors. If it's factual information, be glad to hear it.
I think the important thing is, I agree, these are all things that, when we talk about doing a study, I mean, I think those are all things that we need to sit down and say, okay, let's plan this out as a group, say, all right, we can expect, how are we gonna handle convalescent runs, what's the financial impact of that? And to be able to say, okay, these are 4 different service models, this is what we can anticipate that costing, and project that over, what's it gonna cost per year? What's that gonna look like in 10 years? Or, did we end up spending, this amount versus this amount versus this amount? It's not gonna be a perfect science, but I think as we sit here, I think having to wrap your head around those numbers is hard. When you have, say, okay, this is, what we do in this situation, and be able to compare and contrast those, I think that's, probably the logical next step as we look at what we're gonna recommend moving forward,
So what does Washington County, Harrison County, Scott County, do they do convalescent runs, chuck runs,
Yes.
whatever terminology, do all 3 of them?
Washington, no. Scott, yes.
So what does Scott County do? If their truck goes out on a convalescent run, what do they do for system status management?
So if they're running 2 ambulances, 1 truck's out, then another run comes in, that second ambulance has to transport within to the hospital within the county. They cannot go outside the county.
Does the county
They
know?
have an on-call crew too.
And they have an on-call rep responsible.
Harrison County, we don't, when I was a shift supervisor, operations supervisor, our last ambulance would not make it convalescent.
Right, but before all that, and the ambulances said, hey, you're going out of service, do they let anybody know, other than the internal dispatcher? Do they let the
County
county?
dispatcher.
So Harrison County lets the county dispatcher know that medical one
When the
is
last,
out of service.
when the last truck's out in Scott County, when it goes out, whoever's on the truck will say, dispatch, go ahead and knock out the on-call crew. So it's recorded. Everybody knows at the 911 center that, hey, we're down to our last truck. That truck comes up, if that truck goes out, they'll page out another one to see if they can get anybody else to come in, just like volunteer fire.
Well, that's what I'm getting at too, is like, Harrison County, if they go 1 truck, don't they page Ramsey?
We did, but
They
I would
did.
get on the radio and say 4204, radio, we're down to 1 last truck, go ahead and call Ramsey out. And if they call for a transfer, then I just called the house supervisor, basically said we refuse that call, we're down to 1 truck, we're not making a transfer.
1 truck only in Clark County would never get it.
Oh, that may be for Clark
Yeah,
County, maybe
Scott County
2
is
trucks
a
or 3
whole lot
trucks. I don't
smaller,
know.
you know what I'm saying? I mean, for Clark County, it'd have to be like, you would get down to like 3 trucks.
Yeah.
That's how the system works now. When we're down to 3 trucks, the page goes out. It's an internal page to my people that get a text message, triple truck, this is who they are, this is the truck, what truck is next gonna come available, and this is where everybody else is. Every time we lose somebody, that text gets updated. Now there's down to dual truck, but Monroe is still available. So if we hear Woody, Glenn, we know that that's covered, we still got our.
Well, just like the other day, Charlestown had a PI on Highway 3.
Yep.
You know, I worked with them, I'm like, go. They're tapped out. I mean, they've had 4 or 5 runs. I'm like, go.
Right.
You know, that's what we wanna do. We wanna, just like Amir, we wanna help, even if it's not our area. I had to pay an hour and a half or so overtime. I don't care. I mean, I care, but whatever it takes to help a patient. And if they're in Charlestown's area, if they're in Memphis area, that squad knows it's in Monroe.
We were listening too. We didn't go, we had a conversation. Really, we need to get the system to a point where they just say, hey, we're gonna have a delayed response to this head-on, start Tri-Township for it. But I think also, once we put the tracking devices, if that is the wish of this board where everybody's tracked, our ambulances are obviously already tracked, but if you put that, then the 911 center is gonna be able to see that we're down to 3 trucks now. And it's not just them internally know, but the whole county knows.
That's what I'm saying, I would love to see a process, a system in place that every ambulance in this county is on the same radio channel. They're on the same CAD system, they can see it all, that they know that your squad is clearing Clark, and if there's a run that is of critical importance, that, hey, we're closer.
So their dispatch, obviously, if they have CAD in front of them, I assume they do, they should be able to see our truck clearing from Clark. And if there's a head-on collision down the road, they could easily say, hey, start Tri-Township. They just.
That's the way the different fire department ambulances in Louisville do it, except for one unit at J-Town is geo-fenced to where they have to go back to their place. But if Anchorage Middletown is coming available out of U of L and there's a shooting at 9th and Broadway, they're going to make that run even though they're from the east.
That's the way it needs to be.
And I think
That's the way it does.
dispatching the closest, most appropriate, that's where it's.
That's coming anyways, I mean, if we could get a start on it now before the state says you have to do it, I think there's gonna be a lot more people that are willing to do it on their own terms instead of it's a state mandate that's unfunded.
Be the leader. Be
I
the
say
leader.
moving back, I feel like we hijacked your,
No, this is all kind
No,
of.
it's good. I think we wanna have this, yeah.
Don't
I
ask
wanna
any
make
more
sure-
questions like this.
I wanna make
See
sure
what
you
you
had
did?
anything
I've
else.
been biting my tongue all meeting anyway.
Did you?
No,
You had all
No,
opportunity, didn't you?
this is great. I've got a really good feel now, for what's going on, and, love all the suggestions. I would love for us to get ahead of everything, like you said, and be a leader, so appreciate the time.
Absolutely.
I've got a comment. I don't want to add 30 more minutes to this meeting. I was just wondering, is New Chapel's exit from Floyd County, does that strengthen our services in Clark County? Like, will some of those ambulances, services, staff even be brought over to Clark County?
100%.
So we will, I know there's a contract for a certain number of ambulances, and I keep hearing that we need more ambulances. So are we talking about like a renegotiation of contract, or just some of the stuff coming over here, basically?
Well, I would throw out one thing too, that anytime we go over 6, we don't get an additional bill for ambulance.
That's a fact. Yesterday, when we have 7 runs and I end up going to Monroe for an accident, it's very true.
You can, sorry, I didn't hijack.
I appreciate you making that comment. That comment needed to be made many times before, but I appreciate you making that comment.
And it doesn't matter, we said this already, it doesn't matter how many ambulances we have, you're gonna need one more. It's just, it feels like that all the time. But yes, to answer your question, those resources will come over here. They will not, nobody's job with New Chapel is being impacted because of that exit. They're all getting relocated. There's no additional cost to Clark County for those services.
Now, the question that I've been asked is the fire company no longer being within New Chapel EMS.
Right.
Any of the employees that are currently New Chapel EMS, is there plans for them to go to leave? I guess would that be a leave, like they would no longer work at New Chapel EMS and go to the fire department?
When the New Albany Township stands up their fire department, I'm sure they will get some applications because that's a natural thing for us. Is that an immediate thing?
The rumor, just so you know, the rumor that we're hearing next to you is 9 people are leaving. So
I don't think that's correct.
Okay. Well, good.
They need to hire 9
Okay.
and they need to hire.
All right. Very good.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
I do just want to close with something. 911 has the licenses available in the room, that every one of their ambulances can have a computer-aided dispatch terminal in their vehicle. If that's an option that you all want to go with, Brad has said that it's available. 911 board pays for it. I know there were some issues with Zoll and some compatibility.
So to that, well,
Because then you could possibly even eliminate, when we're talking down the road, but eliminate the ability or even the need to have on these, low priority runs, radar traffic. You could just, your runs could be on scene. Each truck that, new chapter dispatch assigns a run to squad 4. Squad 4 doesn't have to go responding. They can click on scene, in or out, and then they can go available and
That-
reduces traffic.
that's something to think about, and maybe talk more offline. We're getting ready to have a major overhaul in the hardware that's gonna be on those trucks, and then potentiality will be greatly increased once that retrofit happens. So I think that's a real possibility that we could pick up.
He wanted me to mention that would be available. It's already in that system.
I think for homework for next time, like I said, I'll take some of those discussions, we talked about the safety plan, put a rough draft together, and send it out for everybody, and get some feedback with hopes of, coming to a consensus at the next meeting. I know we've talked too, I know both of us are kind of scratching out some numbers and things, we probably need to sit down and formalize that, and maybe do a presentation here on what those numbers look like, just so everybody is on the same page of what, what that impact would be. It's probably the two homework assignments between the next meeting. I proposed July 16th, but I'm all over the place, so it's I don't know how that looks for other people, but I think we were talking about bi-monthly. I'm not opposed to a June meeting, but we were looking at bi-monthly, at least initially.
July 16th is
that
if we do it during the day, but it is a county fair that evening.
Is
so
it?
I'm not sure if it
Okay.
affects any responses.
And
So I can send a doodle poll out or something like that.
I can request that they change it, but the District 9 ambulance providers actually have a conference call at the same time on the third Tuesday.
Okay.
So if third Tuesday could be changed here, that would be awesome, but
Yeah, I'm open to that. Yeah, I think it was just more of had to pick a recurring day, so I don't know that any of us is married to the third Tuesday if there's
What
a
about the fourth
unknown.
Tuesday?
What's that?
What about the fourth Tuesday, which would be June 25th, and that would put it on June 25th to have a meeting.
25th or 23rd?
July.
June 25th.
Oh, June 25th.
Well,
Yeah, we'll see.
he was talking about July, not having one in June.
But I'm not opposed to a June one. We were talking about doing it every other month when we initially had our meeting, but I'm not opposed to a end of June meeting at all. So if you wanna look at June 25th.
Yeah, I think if we're working on this projects that you said,
Well, I know sometimes when we talk about dates, looking at what we're gonna do moving forward, it looks a long ways off, but it's not. So I don't think we can meet too soon, so I think June 25th would be fine with me if that works for others. We'll put that tentative, and then we all can check your schedules, and if it ends up not working for people, we can always look at alternative. We'll try to get a notice out ASAP so everybody's in the loop.
And I'll get the fire department numbers.
Okay.
I'll
Involuntory.
Well, we probably send out like essentially the whole 911 board, so everybody knows, from that side of
Yeah.
things. And yeah. Anything else? Any other things on the agenda? Any other?
So who sends out the notifications of the meetings is,
We do a public notification just like we do a health board meeting and things like that.
Doug
but,
doesn't send anything out?
But I'll,
yeah, I think we probably
anybody wants to just leave their email or just sign in.
Yeah.
sheet,
or reach out and say, I want to be added to the
Yeah,
list,
add it
because
to
we
it.
want to make sure everybody's, we want to make sure anybody who's interested is here and has a chance to voice their opinion. So anytime, there's a sign-in sheet if you want to, be added or whatever. All right, anything else? You got a motion to adjourn? Yes, sir. All right, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
1 o'clock still here.
What's that?
1 o'clock here.
We got a health department usually, but there's the conference rooms in